Hey Shahar, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you again. I think we met 3 years ago, was it?
Yes, almost exactly.
Which you remembered and I didn't. But tell us, it was at your graduation show. Tell us about the story of. Tell us who you are. By the way, this is Shahar Livne speaking to me as part of our Screen Time series of interviews, sponsored by Philips TV and Sound. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm from Israel originally. I moved to the Netherlands, specifically to Eindhoven, to do my bachelor at the Design Academy here in Eindhoven, which I graduated almost exactly 3 years ago. I did a department called Men and Leisure, which is more open in a way. A lot of people, they ask me a little bit like to tell, but it's hard to say because some of us were going really into the social design or system design. Some of us graduate with materials like I did. But I think it's a very open for deep thinking. And when I graduated, I already found out kind of who I am. That's why I call myself a conceptual material designer. A little bit maybe criticism about the world of material design, but also a little bit of developing it further. And I'm working on mainly 2 long-term projects already for 3 years. And in the meantime, I do other commission work and open calls and stuff like that.
And you say you're a material designer, so that means you're more interested in materials than products, I guess.
It's actually, I always add the conceptual because the material is there, but it's not the main focus. Like the material is always the beginning point. So it's more like the stories that the material have to tell. So I use them more as the medium to tell the story. So it can end up in a product. I made furniture pieces, I made the vessels. But they're all in a way to tell a bigger story.
Okay, so why don't you show us your presentation, and I think then it'll all become clear.
Yeah, sure. I'm not very good with Zoom, so excuse me for a second. Share screen. And then... Is it working?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So this is kind of like a small scheme that I usually, when I tell about what I do, I show. A lot of times, what I found out that in material design, people are really focusing on let's make a new material or let's replace a material. And I felt that materials, they have so much more to tell than just become something new or create a new material. So every time of course, I start with something which is interesting for me. For example, now I'm working on the connection between bees and trees. It's my new project that I'm working on. And it all started from a material. So from honey and wax, beeswax and tree resin. But then I look also at the way we're experiencing this material and what is their story. You can see like I always have like the scale of time, so how it was in the past, how is it now in the present. Sometimes I do speculative design for the future, but also the way you experience it as humans, in the contextual way, so the way we sense it, the way it connects to the natural world or to our culture, or the way it is made or being formed in nature, the way we extract it, and the way we process it. I said I have 2 long-term projects that I'm working on. So this was my graduation project in 2017 called Metamorphism. And in a nutshell, I researched the way the geological processes will transform plastic into a new type of raw material. So it's a speculative material research. yeah, and it kind of got a lot of attention. So I just continued working on it and investigating it from different angles. It started when I was doing still my study, and I found out about this plastic agglomerate, which is a naturally occurring plastic rock that was discovered in Hawaii, and it was kind of like the the first step towards this investigation. So what do I actually do in this project is that I also create a material. So it's a speculative material that imitates the geological process called metamorphism. So it's when, for example, you have bones from animals, and then they go under pressure and heat, and they transform into limestone or into fossil oil. But then it can continue to transform under the pressures of the earth. So now we have this plastic agglomerate rock, but what will happen when it continues to transform? And it's interesting because plastic is a very heavy subject, I think, nowadays. So a lot of people can react to this project, either if it comes from a design point of view, or it comes from a very personal point of view. Because what I say is not that plastic is good or bad, but I look at it in a natural perspective, so in a very big perspective. Which means that sometimes I get attacked by people to say to me like, oh, but what is your opinion about it? Like, are you recycling plastic? Are you trying to say plastic is a good thing? And I like to look in a neutral way. So I give people the place to really find out for themselves what they think about it and have a little bit of a deeper thinking. This is the material result, which is not actually the main thing about the project, but it's more a medium to tell the story. I call it lithoplast. So it comes from the Greek word lithos, which means stone, and plast, it means can be molded. And that's why we also call plastic. So I create those kind of new objects that they have a kind of a relation, like the archetype, they have a relation to clay in a way, because what I want to tell is that this new material, this lithoplast, might become a new resource, a new natural resource as part of our geological strata, and how when certain materials disappear, new ones are being born. So this is really the natural process of the earth. This is another object that I made for my graduation. So a little bit like this, you never know if it's ancient or is it futuristic, a little bit tribal, trying to look into the archetypes of clay and the way we used to communicate with clay. And this is, I wanted to show, we just showed it a year ago in Design Miami in Basel as part of Elements Earth. It was a Design at Large exhibition by Eric Chen. And it was really nice because he came to me and he asked me if I can make an installation for the exhibition about Earth. And I created this kind of a little Zen garden showing different elements from the Metamorphism project. And we had this beautiful background movie from Alan Bohm that reacted to my work. Yeah, so, and of course, Gallery Vivid were the one who sponsored me for this exhibition. So this is kind of like how I always develop this project. Sometimes I get commissions, and it's interesting to look at it from new angles. Here I really looked at the place of sitting down and meditating about the change of nature. So creating this kind of space to do that. Yeah, this is another project I did for geodesign. which was took place here in Eindhoven in the Dutch Design Week a year ago, 2019. And it was kind of like a diversion through the metamorphism. So I looked again into plastic, but it was really interesting to find out that this is specifically an image from the Pacific garbage patch, which is a very huge, it's I think 4 times, I'm not sure, the size of Texas. And it's an accumulation of all the plastic that comes from different countries, and it goes through currents in the ocean. It becomes almost like a continent by itself. And what I did a research, and I found out that there's actually now scientists that they're kind of mapping the animals which are living on that island or living off from that island, even on the microscopical scale. And they found out that there is really special microbes which are unique for that island. They don't exist in the ocean surrounding it. And I thought, oh, it brings a really interesting ethical questions, like what happens if we gonna clean this mess that we're trying to do, and what happens to the animals which are surviving on it or even developing because of it. So geodesign, I don't know if the viewers really saw it or not, but it was more meant to have an open-end questions for about the subject of junk. That was the theme of the exhibition. And I created in the Van Abbe Museum, it's the art museum here in Eindhoven, kind of like an immersive installation with video, but also like with the physical projections. And I wanted to go from different scales. So what you see now is from NASA. And it's the way that those garbage patch are actually accumulating. And slowly you get smaller and smaller. So for example, this is a smaller view into really the environment. And then the microscopic microbes, which are on the patch itself. My other long-term project is called the Meat Factory, and I'm working with slaughterhouse waste or byproducts. So for example, what you see in this image is a pigment I developed out of blood. In this case, it's from a cow. So it was interesting because I started it during my studies. We had an assignment called conflict of interest in the meat industry. And I'm myself a vegetarian already for 17 years. And it was really interesting for me to go back to the animals and the way we're interacting with animals and how meat became really removed from nature. So I started with pigment making, which was very interesting because I had really like a personal touch with the blood, and I bought this. I brought those buckets from the slaughterhouse, which was kind of horrible for me because they were still warm from the killing the same day. But I powered through because I think this is very important also for us as designers, to be close to the materials we're working with and where they're coming from, even if it's something which is very mentally difficult. Those are some experiments I did for the assignment at school. So how can it become a 3D material? And the result was this kind of a soft material, almost like leather. I showed it in the Dutch Design Week in 2014 in this kind of food relating exhibition, food and design exhibition. And it was really interesting to see how people are reacting to it, because when you come into the space, you don't really know what you're looking at. Okay, it's displayed a little bit like a butchery, but people weren't sure. And the more I tell them what it's made of, they really react in a very extreme way. Even though they eat meat or they're not vegetarians, they interact, they have leather. And that was like kind of a turning point with this project, that I thought, oh, there's way more layers within this, just to make a material from waste materials. In 2019, it was really nice because I could go a step further and really make this beautiful sneaker with a sustainable sneaker brand called Natu. They sell my material in an exhibition for textile, and they called me up and we said, okay, let's collaborate. Let's see what is the potential of this project. I never did it into a product. Let's see what happens. So this is the product we did. We launched it in January last year, and it's really, really nice because it got some good comments. It really shows also, I got some interest from other shoe brands that are interested to change the way they work with materials and to develop more sustainable materials because of this shoe. So it was very, very nice. And yeah, and now I'm busy with this grant that I received from the Dutch creative industries here in the Netherlands, and we're developing it into a yarn. So that will be the next stage of this project. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Sorry, in the last image, what was the material? It was scrap material. What kind of material was it?
So it's also byproducts from the meat industry. So it's this combination of skin and bones products. I'm not going to say specifically what, because it's the secret recipe, but we're working only with animal extracted materials. So what you see on this yarn is already our first tryout, which looked very successful. So now we're going to develop it further.
I mean, it's interesting that a vegetarian is involved in all these products with making use of animal waste. I mean, you touched on that yourself, but surely for you, you would rather that there were no animals exploited for human use at all. So how do you get over that moral dilemma?
Well, I'm vegetarian because I'm doing horse riding for many years. So for me, this closeness to the animal, what made the connection between the meat and the living animal. But I don't think that that we should ignore the big industry that still exists. So it's still here. It's not disappearing. I don't think it will disappear that easily. So I think it's very important to understand it and also to highlight it and what happens there. So for me, working with those materials is kind of respecting the entire animal, is working with the entire animal, and not supporting a company, an industry which is very wasteful.
But if you help the industry find commercial uses for the waste, then aren't you making that industry more likely to continue and to make even more money, potentially be even more cruel for the animals?
I've been asked that in the past. I don't think I give them a solution, because it's something that happens anyway. Most of those materials, they get incinerated or they reach waterways. So for me, it's more like to find a way to avoid further pollution that they do anyway. I don't really want to encourage them to kill more animals, but we have those resources that I think should be used in a way. And what I suggest sometimes to companies when they come to me and they say, this is interesting, instead of leather that you're using, because this is completely natural and not treated chemically. So there is some kind of moral conflict that I'm dealing with sometimes, and especially as a vegetarian. And I myself, for many years, I didn't wear any leather. But yeah, I believe that as long as it's here, it needs to be dealt with.
And of course, you know, Khalila Essaidi, another designer based in the Netherlands, who did a project with the shit from from the meat industry. Yeah. So there's a lot of you, there's several of you running around trying to at least reduce the wastefulness of this industry. But what was it that made you decide that you were interested in materials? This is a trend that I've seen across lots of younger designers. Instead of wanting to be the next Philippe Starck or Marcel Wanders or the superstar designer, you're interested in process and research. And then, of course, there are products at the end of it, as you've just shown, but you're not jumping to the objects. You're thinking first about waste, material, nature, geology. How did you come to be interested in that rather than making a table, for example?
Well, if I go really back, I think I was one of those kids that they always like ask questions and read articles and look in the encyclopedia or going to museums. And when I had to choose what I wanted to study, we have really great industrial design institutes in Israel. But I felt that I don't want to be an industrial designer. I don't want to find a new way of sitting necessarily, or making a table or a lamp. And and when I arrived to the Design Academy in Eindhoven, I think it's something that they really encourage, to have like a little bit of a deeper thinking and more looking at systems and the way it affects people in different ways. Like I said, the department where I studied, a lot of us, we graduate as social designers, which are focusing on systems. So it was interesting to have my own take on material design as somebody who came from the leisure department.
And when you, as a vegetarian, turn up at these factories where they process meat with ideas to make new materials out of blood, for example, what is their response? That you're crazy, or that are they interested in that? And what happens next? Do you then take out a patent for that process, or where do you go next with that? Yes, it's one thing to do an exhibition at Art Basel or Design Miami, but it could become a scalable industrial process, right? So
yeah, definitely. This is the project which I let it go more to the scalable. The Metamorphism stays in the speculative, more artistic part. And this one I'm very interested in working further with bigger brands. It's funny that you ask, because when I, especially because my Dutch is not really good, and when I go to those people, we have a little bit of a language blockage. But I think, especially here in Eindhoven, they're already used to us crazy Design Academy students like asking weird questions. But I feel sometimes there's no trust, like because I'm vegetarian, or because I think this industry gets a lot of criticism, which is for a reason, of course, and they're a little bit suspect sometimes that it's more like to come against them instead of working with them. But yeah, I think the moment I explain like that it comes from a place of respect for the animal and to avoid this pollution, I think they're more open to it.
And so what is your ambition for that then? Is that you would sell the formula to someone, or build your own factory, or is it enough just for you to put this speculative idea into the public domain and see people's responses to it?
So what we're doing now, what I'm actually doing now with this grant that I received, I'm working together with a polymer engineering company here in the Netherlands, and we want to find a way to make it scalable. So first, one of the most challenging things about bio materials nowadays that it's not waterproof. So that's something that we want to find out through the materials, not to add any chemicals to them. Yeah, and we want to find out like what kind of potential it has for the industry. So it's really at the beginning now. We're just starting, but I think the moment I can work with a partner, which is a big company that creates those kind of yarns for the industry, then it gives me more space as a designer to work with bigger brands and to do corporations and maybe scale it or do a patent for it. I don't know.
And most designers, somewhere inside themselves, they have a desire to make the world a better place, and they hope that what they do does that. But as you mentioned with the plastic work you've done is neutral. You're not saying we can clear the world of plastic. You're not saying plastic is good or bad. You're just saying there is plastic and this is what can happen to it. Same with the meat industry. You're not saying the meat industry is bad. You're just saying it's not very efficient. So do you sort of, where does that kind of neutral position come from? Is it just a kind of a provocative stance, or you just don't care, or is it a sort of philosophical position that you can't do anything about it, but you might as well see what happens when you rearrange things?
It's definitely a philosophical approach, because I say, first of all, what I hear a lot is really like, oh, the designers will save the world. Also at the Design Academy, I heard it, and it's something that I don't believe in personally. I think it's quite of a big assignment to put on designers. We do improve and we do break through into new ideas, and we inspire, and it's very important. But I think people need to ask more questions about the world around them. So the moment I take this step back, not as a person, but as a designer, I allow this space. And I think it's way more interesting. Every time I show in an exhibition and I stand there and nobody knows that I'm the designer, I always like to see how people are starting a discussion between themselves. And then I say to myself, then your job is done. The moment these people are asking the questions and they're starting to see things they didn't see before or they weren't exposed to in their everyday life, I think that's my place as a designer. That's my goal.
It's funny because that's one of my motivations for journalism as well. It's like, just put things out there and let people get on with the discussion. I don't know if you saw, but we had that in the last few days. Somebody criticized the way that we were talking about designers' responses to coronavirus. So we wrote a story about the criticism, and then people were criticizing us, or me in particular, for not taking a position on it. But I sometimes feel like I don't have a position, but I like to have a platform where you can express your position. That seems to me like quite a useful thing to do.
I see it a lot in Dezeen. I usually tell myself not to look at comments, but I see it a lot that you do it in Dezeen, that you're either you post an article, an opinion article, and then you post the other way from somebody else, or you highlight a comment. And I think it's important that there is a place for this conversation going.
Yeah, and also speaking personally, often I don't know what my opinion is, but then writing something about something and then seeing other people discussing it helps me come to an opinion. I think the idea that somehow journalists are supposed to know the answer, same as with designers, supposed to know the answer in advance, is like sets you up for problems, because then you take a position and what if you realize it's bullshit?
But I agree, I completely agree. I also, like, for me, I became vegetarian when I was 14. Like, there was as much as I knew about the world when I was 14, but as a designer, when I started researching more, I wasn't sure my opinion anymore. So I think that's really interesting, and I have this luck to be in this industry where I can ask questions. I have the privilege to ask questions.
But with vegetarianism, you decided to stay a vegetarian, though. You didn't think, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad. I'll start eating meat again.
I don't eat meat, but I do wear leather now because I found out that about leather things that I didn't know. But the meat itself, I don't eat it because for me as a person, which I always try to also divide from my role as the designer, it's more the killing and eating something dead. It's a little bit difficult for me.
But killing and wearing is not so bad for you.
Yeah, well, I don't really wear. That's the thing. So I try not to wear animal products, but I think the killing for the purpose of meat, it's more difficult because the animals are killed for this purpose. So that's kind of what brings us to have this industry, and the byproducts which are coming out of it. It's part of using the whole beast. So it's like in the past when you killed an animal, you used every little piece of it from respect to the killing or from respect to the effort that you put into it. And that's more like my position here. It's more like using the entire beast.
So it's more like going back to the whale hunters of the Arctic, for example, or the Native Americans, where they would kill the buffalo or kill the whale and use every single part, and there would be nothing left at the end. So it's more
exactly, it's more natural in my perspective. Of course, this industry is not natural because most of the time the animals are being killed in way over bigger numbers than what we really need. But at the end, I think the moment we go to this place of using the entire animal or the entire resources, that's more sustainable in my opinion.
And you were saying just now that I forgot what I was going to ask you. What were you saying just now? It's the first time in all the interviews I've been doing, I forgot what my question was going to be. I'll think of it in a minute. But I wanted to ask you about, you showed a picture of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Mm-hmm. Are you sure that was actually the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
Yeah, I can't be sure. It's something I found on Google. So,
do you know that I'm pretty sure it isn't? Yeah,
maybe not. Maybe it's a different one. It's because a Google.
Because it has hills in the background. There's islands in the picture.
Yeah, it could be a different patch. There are 5, I think, different ones. So,
well, apparently,
plastic is everywhere.
Yeah. I did a lot of research on the garbage patch, and apparently there's nothing you can see there. Most of the particles of garbage are tiny and very, very far apart. So there is no actual patch there.
Yeah, well, the research that I followed, like the really scientific one, is one that was conducted in the Pacific Garbage Patch. So they did find those communities of bacteria and microalgae. The picture, I'm not sure because it's something I found. It was one of my images for my research. So maybe I'm wrong with that one, but I know scientifically, and I also spoke to the scientists, and they go on excursions to the Pacific Garbage Patch.
Okay, and now I remembered my question I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
So you said that you don't believe that designers can make the world better. Do you think that designers could actually make the world worse?
Also, well, plastic was designed and it became kind of a monster who got out of control in a way. So, well, I didn't say that I don't think we can make it better. I said I don't think we can save it. Because there are so much forces in play that it's not really something that designers can take out. Like, for example, big companies with a lot of money and politics and etc. But I do think we can do better if it's by making something which is a product that makes life easier. Is it by questioning and making people think? Is it by giving possibilities? And yeah, I think yeah, we make it worse also with the way we're consuming and making, and well, we're kind of creating the consumerism in its worst. Fast fashion, it's also part of being a designer. The materials we choose, we have sometimes we have a big impact if we don't really look all the way to where it comes from.
And in terms of plastic and the environment, do you think that everyone's now kind of locked into this lockdown, the coronavirus? Do you think that we're being distracted from those kind of problems? A lot of people are saying, oh, it's amazing, the fish are back in the rivers, the birds are back in the trees, but we've kind of forgotten about even 3 or 4 months ago, the things that were really worrying us: climate change, plastic pollution, and things like that. What's your opinion on this crisis that we've been going through? Is it a distraction, or is it a symbol of all those other problems?
Well, I think it's both. On one hand, it's hard for me to see that kind of, I think a lot of plastic companies are kind of using this for their own benefit, like to say, oh, we have to use one-time things like the mask. And I see a lot of people just throwing away their latex gloves in the street. So we're going to become more hygienic and more like one-time users. But on the other hand, I think it's fascinating also to see like the way technology is dealing with those natural phenomena. Like, yeah, it's a virus that was there. It was already there. It evolved until the moment that it started affecting us. And I think that's really interesting point of view. Like the moment it affects us, then we care. Before that, I think people are kind of ignoring those big things.
So do you think it will be the same with climate change then? It's only when the water is up to our waist that people might actually do something about it?
Unfortunately, yes. I think that's the moment we see it happening, then we're gonna take care. The moment we're almost on the oh, we're gonna die, then we care. And that's what makes me a little bit sad, but that's how humans are, I think.
And again, with your work, again, this neutral position, does that allow you to predict what might happen? So, I mean, with the Plastiglomerate project, for example, that sort of talks about the Anthropocene era that we're in now, whereby human activity is changing the geological structure of the Earth. And in doing a project like that, what do you think, if we carry on as we are, what will happen? What will the mountains of the future look like? What will the seas of the future look like if we continue to put plastic into them? Will there be anyone left to see it? You're taking a kind of snapshot of things that are happening now, but do you have a projection of where this is going to take us?
Well, the interesting thing is that I didn't position any human next to my material. So this material can be worked out by any civilization. So I didn't really connect the humans to this, but I more connected the natural processes to it. And that's what more interests me as well, because when I did the research for it, I talked a lot to geologists. And geologists said to me, we don't, as a geologist, I don't look at human scale time scales. I look in really, really big time scales, because, for example, I asked him, okay, can you give me like in how many years this material will come out of the ground? He said, yeah, I can't, because we're looking at time scales that it's really hard to perceive sometimes. And yeah, and he said like, what he said, I always quote him. He said to me, the world at the end won't give a fuck about us, about humans. We're such a small part of its life that if we're looking in the future, we don't know what will happen there. So maybe it won't be us, maybe it will be somebody else.
And does that bother you, or do you just accept that? Again, is that a philosophical position? It's almost like a Buddhist position of like, that's the world, I'm just a dot in the middle of it.
Yeah, I do. I do accept it. I think it's really my philosophical position that we're here just for a little while, and what we do is just part of the natural metabolism.
And again, your work, the plastiglomerate project can be seen two ways. One, it can be seen as a warning. Oh my God, this is happening. This is terrible. What a disaster. It was in Paolo Antonelli's show. It's in Milan Triennale last year, which was a story about like ecological catastrophe. But you could also look at that and think, wow, that's really beautiful, actually. That's so interesting. And in the future, maybe we'll have whole islands made of this stuff, and that will be great. And bacteria will evolve into larger animals that will then eat this stuff. So it could actually be a kind of an extremely, not positive, but a less catastrophic way of looking at your work. It could be viewed in that way.
Yeah, definitely. That's again this neutral position, like that you can look at it from the two sides of the coin. You know, it's on one hand, what I see is that people are reacting to it. Like a lot of people say to me, "Wow, this is really scary," but I see it as a very fascinating process, and it's part of the evolution of materials and the evolution of the world. So yeah, maybe I'm a little bit philosophical sometimes, I don't know, but I agree with you. I think it should be seen in two ways, for sure.
And do you get people getting angry with you because of that position?
Yeah, I have a little story to tell, that after I graduated, before the graduation show, we always have an open day. And it was the first time that the public saw my project. And I remember there was this lady, and she came to me and she was very aggressive. She was standing in front of it and reading from the little card. And I was standing there, and then she came to me in a very aggressive way and she said, "Yeah, but what is your opinion? Like, we have to clean the plastic." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm just showing something that happens." And she started fighting with other people around my project. I was fascinated because I really didn't know how the public will react to it. And it was the first time that it was out there. And to see those people starting to talk about the meaning of recycling. Is recycling even helpful? What happens, like, to us personally when we use plastics? But on the other hand, plastic are also something that we have, like, that's why we have technology the way it is. That's why we can cure certain diseases. So it was really fascinating. And that, I think, was one of the only time that people were angry to me. After that, people are starting to see it a little bit bigger.
And finally, you mentioned you were doing some work with bees, and I noticed there's some bees on the picture behind you. So what is your bee project?
Well, it's really, really, really at the beginning. So I can't really tell a lot, but I'm just really fascinated with the place of bees in nature. For some reason, I don't really know where it came from me. But I think now there's kind of also this, well, the thing with bees for a really long time is that they're disappearing. So the importance of bees, I think it's starting to become a little bit, people are becoming more aware of it. Also because of climate change and our food resources. And it's like this little animals that people are not really aware how big effect it's going to have. But there's also like this trend a little bit now with wood, also Cambio from Former Phantasma, and I saw there are a few other exhibitions about wood. And yeah, I don't know, this relationship in the organic and the non-organic, the animals and the plants, it's just something that fascinates me. So I can't really tell too much because it's really, really, really at the beginning. I just wanted to mention it a little bit.
But is that most likely going to end up in some kind of material research, or you don't
Probably.
know? Yeah.
Probably. Because that's my medium of communication.
Yeah. So honey clothes or wax
Who knows?
shoes.
Who knows?
Actually, let's take, just for the final thing I want to ask you, just remind me what we were talking about before we went live, because I was asking you about how is lockdown in Eindhoven, and you said that they're preparing the restaurant terraces for when they're allowed to open again. And you said that in Eindhoven, they have this thing called smart lockdown, which I imagine was people running around with apps on their phones and stuff like that. But what is smart lockdown exactly?
It's intelligent quarantine, they call it. Yeah, well, for me, it's a little bit weird because I come from Israel, which is a country that for us, it would never work because we're very warm people and we like to hug and kiss each other. And we speak very close to each other. And I think here it was very interesting to see that the government is really giving the people to make their own choices. I do think that, well, you can see it in the amount of death cases between Israel and here. Here they had, I think, 5,000. And in Israel, we had about 280. Well, you can see that people are not being intelligent about it so much. But it's really, I think, it's fascinating for me as somebody who comes from a completely different culture to see how they're handling it as well. And well, myself, I think that economy comes first when it comes between health and economy here in the Netherlands. And of course, each government is handling differently. So, and in Israel, we had really like a complete lockdown. So it's very, very interesting to see.
So in the Netherlands, the smart lockdown just means you need to be smart and figure it out for yourself rather than any kind of technological solution.
Yeah, we're really, it's about the human intelligence, not really the technology intelligence.
Great. Well, it's good to see you again, Shaha, after all these years. And thanks for sharing your amazing work with us. And
thank you very much.
Soon in the real world.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.